Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us today, whether it be Florida, Connecticut, we had a couple from there, whether you're Michigan, California, Idaho, again, you are welcome here. This is a safe space where we can grow. And so here at Ethos, we ask a lot of questions. And so we delve into the book of the Bible, this ancient Jewish tradition of all these oral writings. And so what we believe is important is that we read it responsibly, right? We understand the audience. We understand the context. We do all of the study over the words, different rabbinical writings from the past, thousands of years ago. We look at all of this in order that we might have a responsible reading. And so after we've done that, then we begin to ask questions of what can it mean for me right here, right now. And so we do a lot of prep work for each and every one of these videos. And so we hope you enjoy it. So we are continuing through the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is beautiful. It's filled with so much depth, so much relevance to today, but it's also a book that we have to understand it was not a history book. Right? The book of Genesis was never written as like this perfect guide to, this date to this date to this date and this literal name and this literal name. That was never the point. The reason why Genesis was written in the first place was not to write a literal history. It was to, of course, connect who they were as a people because they were in the middle of Babylonian captivity. Again, their people had been taken hostage. Right? They'd been taken into the city of Babylon, and they were essentially saying, who are we? Right? How long until we forget our recipes, our traditions, our rituals? Right? We need to hold on to those things. All of those stories around the campfires, those are essentially guiding us into who we are as Israelites. And so they compiled all of the rich traditions, and they called it Torah. Right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These 5 books, these compilations, all were meant to remind Israel in the middle of this captivity, we know who we are. Right? We will stay Hebrews. We will not assimilate. And so when they would bring out this ancient text, there was celebration. It wasn't like many of the churches today that you see where they'll look at this Bible, they'll bring it out, and we're like, oh no, not again. We've heard this before. For Jewish individuals, when that ancient scroll is brought out, there's rejoicing. It's a celebratory thing, right? Because this rabbi is about to speak to you from this ancient text that has essentially held your community together. It's a beautiful thing. And so again, Torah, every time we read it, understand it's basically miniaturizing the story of Israel in every telling. So whether it's the story of Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of these individuals, these different characters, they are essentially the story of Israel told in a miniature form. And so when Jewish people are reading this text, they find themselves in the story all the time. And so there are warnings, right? There are moments of not just warning, but also blessing. Right? Remember the days of our forefathers, the days of good rain and good crops. Those days will come again. And then there are other warnings where, look, if you go this direction, we are going to be headed in captivity again. Please don't go that direction again. Right? So that's what Torah was. And so Genesis, today we're going to delve into chapter 26 again, and we're going to finish it off. So we're going to go chapter 26 all the way through the end, starting at verse 25. So I'm going to read you those verses first. And then, as always, what we do is we go verse by verse, and we just discuss some of the rabbinical ideas, some of the words, some of the ideas here, just to pull it all together. So here we go. Verse 25. And he built an altar there, and he called in the name of the Lord. And he pitched his tent there, and Isaac's servants dug a well there. And Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and a group of his companions, and Pekol his general. And Isaac said to them, Why have you come to me, since you hate me? And you have sent me away from you? And they said, We have seen that the Lord was with you. So we said, Let there now be an oath between us. between ourselves and you, and let us form a covenant with you. Verse 29. If you do not harm us, as we have not touched you, and as we have done to you only good, and was sent your way in peace, so do you now, blessed of the Lord. So he made a feast for them, and they ate and they drank. And they arose early in the morning, and they swore one to another. And Isaac escorted them, and they went away from him in peace. Verse 32. And it came to pass on that day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug. And they said to him, we have found water. Right? Keep in mind, this is after this covenant is made. Verse 33, and he named it Shebath. Therefore, the city is named Beersheba until that very day. And Esau was 40 years old, and he married Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, not the musk. And they were a vexation of the spirit to Isaac and to Rebekah. So, here we go. Let's delve in. Verse 25. Notice this. He built an altar there, and he called it in the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there. And Isaac's servants dug a well there. So understand this. Altars, right? Altars were not built as just a place where they would like sacrifice or those kind of things. The bigger idea of an altar, the larger context here is it's going to commemorate something really important. And so whether it's good or bad, it was placed there as a mark for them to remember. And so if their people had gone through something really tragic, they would make an altar. They'd make an altar they would remember. If they went through some really big triumph and they wanted to celebrate, they would build an altar. And so essentially an altar was a visual representation for the people to remind them, this is where we've been, this is where we're going, right? And it reminds me today, we have these things called statues, right? We have them all over the place. And some people love them, some people hate them. The idea here is we do the same thing often in our culture, just like the Egyptians did, the Babylonians. Go over to Europe, go down to some of our Eastern friends. Wherever you go, you're going to find statues, books, you're going to find memorials, and all of it is placed there. Because the idea is we want to remember our history. Whether it's good, bad, ugly, we remember those different moments. And hopefully when we see the bad, we don't repeat them. When we see the good, it reminds us of courage, freedom, those kind of things. The idea was, for the Hebrews, the altar is a point of reference. Just like today, we create points of reference everywhere we go. Right? Some of us, even in an individual basis, we will create points of reference, won't we? We'll think about our own stories and we'll say, oh yeah, I remember when I had that car. And we'll have memories about that car. And that car was there during an era of our lives when we first got our license. And so we had a really crummy car, but it's what we could afford, right? But then you have that era where you move to a different car and you get the point. We have different points of remembrance, right? These different points where we remember, different points where we learn things. These visuals help us, or at least they can help us, right? Let's keep going. Verse 26, and Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and a group of his companions and Pekol and his generals. So notice this. Abimelech, he is king of Moloch. So that's historically been Israel's enemy. Yeah. And then of course they worship the god Moloch, right? So all of this is a big enemy for Israel. So when they hear Abimelech went to him from Gerar, right, this middle ground, and he brings his general, this is kind of a big deal. This group is coming together, and when you bring your general, right, when the king brings his general to meet another king, we're either talking two things. We're talking war, or we're talking a truth, right, a treaty, sorry. We're talking about coming together to fight or to find peace. And so the question, of course, as someone who's reading this is going to be saying, they're going to wonder, right? What's going to happen next? Does Israel attack their enemy? Do they go to war with their enemy? They definitely have differences. Or do they come together and find peace? Do they have a truce, right? And that's the question. When two empires, groups, tribes, when they come together in ancient times, We know there's going to be some kind of drama. Whatever happens here, it's going to be interesting. And so, again, fascinating to me that Israel, they're slowly, though, they're moving toward a really interesting ethic. And I would argue many tribes during this era were. They were moving toward an ethic where they were beginning to seek peace rather than war. You don't find Israel, again, Israel's an interesting tribe. They're not the group who's constantly looking to expand and broaden to get so huge, right? They're not looking to be the next Babylon, Egypt, Medo-Persia, Rome. That's not within Israel's DNA. In Israel's DNA, it really starts here. They're learning right here. It's not about obtaining the most land. It's about relationship. And so the idea here, when the groups come together, we're hoping for peace, right? We're hoping there's going to be peace. And so it continues. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and you have sent me away from you?" Right? Because he was sent away. They said, "We don't know about you." Right? But notice this. Now it's Israel. It's Isaac who has the assumption. Isaac has this assumption that these individuals are only there for war. Yeah, the assumption is they think differently than us, right? They look differently than us. They must want something different. They must want something bad, right? They must be my enemy. They must be the other. And so we don't trust them, right? They're not with us. There are assumptions we make every day. I want to share with you a personal experience I had. I'm going to show you an image, and this image, years ago, I saw this image, and man, on Facebook, I went off. You might even say I was triggered, right? Because here's the image that I had. It's of this young man in a MAGA hat, and he's giving this expression. He has this expression toward this Native American man. And I thought, oh, here's this kid, this privileged kid, right? And he's probably mocking this Native American man. And sure enough, the news, specifically CNN, got a hold of this, and they as well went on about the story. These kids, these MAGA hat wearing kids, they went out there, they were destroying DC, and they were making fun of this poor Native American man, and the whole story blew up. And I remember posting this saying, this kid he is not what America should stand for. I was thoroughly embarrassed by this kid's actions. This is what MAGA people do. I remember that assumption I had. And then, of course, the truth comes out. And it was hard for me because I ate a lot of crow on that one. Because what we found out is Nick Sandmann, he actually was innocent. When the truth came out, it was this Native American protester who got in he and his friends' faces. They were essentially trying to trigger those boys, those young men. And Nick, he kind of has a punchable face, doesn't he? He has that face that it looks like he's laughing. But the truth was, he didn't know what to do. He was being pushed. This guy was in his face. He was attempting to trigger Nick and his friends. And so what we found out is later, Nick ended up suing CNN and winning. Because the bias, the assumption was actually wrong. But many of us, we jumped. We didn't take in enough information, and we jumped way too soon. And this kid, unfortunately, death threats after death threats. He did win this lawsuit, but his name was pretty tarnished. I have another friend, Shelly. She was telling me about an interesting moment. She said she was driving down the road. And by the way, this picture is not of the actual men that she saw. It was the best picture I could do. I thought, how funny would it be to show a movie that I'd seen a long time ago? But anyways, her car was broken down on the side of the road. Not broken down. Her tire had blown. And she's sitting there. She doesn't know how to fix a flat. And so she's trying to call someone. She doesn't have AAA. She's trying to figure this out. And then much to her chagrin, her fear, her horror, she sees lights behind her start to chirrt. But it wasn't necessarily the lights that scared her. It was the thumping music. Boom, 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 boom. The car looked like one of those cars straight from the ghetto, which she wasn't too far from. And so she started to get nervous. Here she is, this young woman on the side of the road by herself, very vulnerable, and she's starting to get nervous. And she kind of looks through the mirror and she sees there are a bunch of young men. And they looked like, to her, they looked kind of like punks, right? They looked like they came from the inner city. They met certain demographics. They weren't all one specific demographic. She said there was a couple white kids, a couple black, but they looked sketchy, she said. They looked sketchy. And so she said she sat there frozen, terrified. What do I do? What are these young men doing? And she said she saw this young man get out of his car, and he begins walking toward her car. And she's panicking. She's thinking, what is going to happen now? She said the young man walked up to her car. She said she tried not to look. She was terrified. She was trying to figure out what was she going to do. Does she have a weapon? What can she do? The young man knocks on the window. Now it's getting real. Now she's terrified. Now she's nervous. So Shelley said finally she rolls the window down a little bit. She says, yes, what can I do for you? I don't want any trouble. And the young man, he smiles and says, ma'am, do you know how to change a tire? She's still not convinced. I'm going to get help. Don't worry. Just go do your thing. He says, ma'am, I'm happy to help you if you need help. And she looks again at the young man. She begins to think maybe he might help. And of course, he might still be there for trouble. She doesn't know. He says, ma'am, you can stay in your car. I have a jack. I'll be happy to do it for you. Her doors are still locked. She rolls the window up. She said she sat there as the rest of the young men got out of the car. They jacked up her car, took off the flat. Underneath the car is where her spare was. They pulled that off, put on the new one, put the old one back under, screwed it in, just the metal part of it, put it in, dropped the car down. He walks back up and he says, ma'am, I hope you have a good night. And now she feels sheepish. She feels kind of silly. She rolls her window down. She said, I tried giving him money, but the young man said, oh, ma'am, don't worry. I just thought if you were my mom, I'd want to help you too. Shelley said she sat in the car stunned and watched as these young men got in their car, turned on the car, music starts thumping again, and they peel off and they leave her in the dust. And she just sat there saying, I cannot believe what just took place. Because I think oftentimes we have assumptions of people, don't we? People that look different than us, talk different than us, think differently than us. And oftentimes we take those fears that we have, those things that we're a bit uncomfortable with, and we have giant assumptions about who they are and who they aren't. And sometimes we miss the beautiful blessing that's just waiting there at the surface. And so Isaac at that moment, he is assuming things about his enemy. His enemy must hate him. His enemy must want the worst for him. He has these assumptions, which Israel definitely would have had about their own enemies as well. And so the story continues. And they said, we have seen that the Lord was with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, between ourselves and you, and let us form a covenant with you. Notice this. This is insane. If you're Israel, you're blown away. First off, his enemies, they are the ones that noticed that God was with them. They noticed. These heathens, these evil people, the enemy, the other, they noticed the good things that God was doing for them. Which of course begs the question, why wasn't Israel then able to see the same in their enemies? Why is Isaac unable to see in this king the same thing? What is it that's causing him to be unable to see the goodness in his enemies like his enemies are able to do with him? That's an interesting question, especially for religious people. Why are we sometimes not able to see the good in the people we often fear and we call enemies? This tiny tribe, here's the beauty of this point here. This tiny tribe is learning to find connection even with their enemies. And it's really pretty fantastic, isn't it? Those that are different than us, sometimes those that are different than us, they can teach us the most, can't they? Right now, we live in a really interesting time. We have CNN and we have Fox, right? We have NBC, CNBC. We have all these different groups telling us their own take on the news. And if you're Fox, you're going to have one perspective. If you're CNN, you have the other. I'm learning in this very volatile time, I'm learning to try to watch them all. And when I'm viewing, whether it's Don Lemon or Tucker Carlson, whoever it is, I am learning to look past my own biases. And I'm just asking the question, what can Joe Rogan, out of listening to this podcast, even though I may not agree with some things, was there something interesting that I might find agreement on? And I think once we do that, we begin to be able to connect and discuss things with just about anyone. Or at the very least, even if we find we are vehemently disagreeing with them, I can at least understand where they're coming from. Now, sometimes I don't always watch the comedy show for my news, right? But I do try to look at all these different perspectives because I think, again, it's important. Watch a little, look for the truth. Truth is going to be in there somewhere. So it's always important to understand who the other is, why they believe what they do. And I think when we do, we can begin having conversations. We can come together and not have these assumptions about each other. And it's really beautiful, and it's probably the hardest thing in the world to do. Number 29, if you do not harm us, as we have not touched you, this is still Abimelech, and as we have done with you only good, and we sent you away in peace, so do you now, blessed of the Lord. So again, King Abimelech, right? The king of Molech, he wants peace. He wants shalom. Nothing missing, nothing broken. The enemy wants peace too. For Israel reading this right here, this would have been earth-shattering. Can you imagine if you're in the middle of Babylonian captivity and the message is, look, the Babylonians, let's look for ways to also find connection there too. These people who destroyed our kingdom, who took us as captives, let's try to find connection with even them. Let's look for the good in even them. Because at the end of the day, they want peaceful relations too with us, right? They want things to be peaceful in their kingdom too. Everyone desires shalom. Well, most, right? How we get there is what differs. How we get there is where the rub is, right? And so it says, so he made a feast for them, and they ate and they drank. So keep in mind, the feast, this is a big deal in ancient culture. Huge. In the Middle East, basically, when you sat down with someone and you had a meal with them, you were saying some interesting things. The most important was this. When you sat down and had a meal, you were essentially saying, these people I'm with, that I'm sitting on the floor with, eating this enormous meal, they are family. Which is why, of course, in the Middle East, people are far more open. They'll kiss one another, right? There's affection. There's no space when you're talking. You're right up in each other's grill. There is space. We're all family. And so when you're eating together, it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. And it's essentially this moment of saying, we are one. We're the same. And this is what I love about Jesus. This is what I absolutely love about Jesus. It says Jesus ate with sinners. And this is why over and over again in the stories, they bring this up. Jesus ate with tax collectors, right? Who were essentially Jewish people who would work for Rome, their enemies. They were despised by their own people. They were traitors, right? Prostitutes, fishermen, the lowest of the low, the dropouts of Torah, right? These were the people he hung out with. the enemies, right? The others. And so sinner meant anyone who was not Jewish or did not fit the typical mold of what was in for Judaism. And so Jesus essentially, he sits with these people, he feasts with his enemies, and he says, we're not enemies. We're family. We're family. And so what I love, Jesus will say things like this, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. The idea is love your enemies. When you pour out that love on them, both parties begin to seek peace, and it's really beautiful. It's something our culture doesn't understand. Right? In our culture right now, we are so divided politically right now. These two individuals, you have Joe Biden and you have Trump, right? Donald Trump. You have these two individuals. And here's the thing. I don't like to get political when I'm talking on here. But the truth is, both of these men have done a great job at dividing us. Yeah, whether it's demonizing those who aren't vaccinated or publicly screaming at different celebrities they hate, these two individuals are the leaders of this country, right? They've been leaders. One was, one is. What is so painful to see is when a leader has a position and they choose to, rather than bring people together, divide, creating more and more other. Not connection, but creating more enemy. And this is, again, for Israel, the call was, no, we're not going to do a Trump-Biden response. We're going to find a way to bring people together. We will cross the aisle. We'll have conversation. We will bring together because we're all part of the same family. We are, if you're here in America, Americans, right? That's what Israel was seeking. We are humans, whether you're a Babylonian or an Israelite, whether you are a Philistine or a Roman, whatever the thing is, whatever the tribe is, we're all still part of the same human race. And if we can find those, if we move beyond assumptions, we can actually get somewhere. We can realize we're all family. We can eat together. The Jesus message is so good. And it really started here in Genesis. When you understand what's happening with the Isaac story, you'll understand Jesus is simply repeating the same message. I would just argue in a more tangible way. But let me finish this. Verse 31, and they arose early in the morning, and they swore one to another, and Isaac escorted them, and they went away from him in peace. So notice this, the act again of swearing an oath, this is big. This is a big one. You are essentially saying, if this truce is broken, my life is forfeit. This is a big deal in ancient culture. Many rabbis have talked about this. No one gives a truce. No one creates a pact lightly. You take it very seriously. And so this is we will have peace. We will have peace or we will die. How many times have you ever heard groups, communities, nations say that? We will have peace or we'll die. We'll have peace or our lives are forfeit. Right? We're quick to go to war, but we're not always quick to seek peace that seriously, are we? 32, and it came to pass that day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug. And they said to him, we have found water. Of course they found water, right? This is the story. Once we find peace, once there's connection, now the water flows, right? It's brilliant. It's a beautiful story. Once we come together with our enemies, once we find peace, once things are restored, once things are reconciled, then there is water. Then there is peace. But here's the thing, it cannot be done unless we first reconcile. And that's why this verse in Matthew, Jesus says this, and it's beautiful. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, which again is what Isaac and them are doing, if we remember the beginning of our story here, this section. If you offer your gift at the altar, and then remember that your brother or sister or, enemy Abimelech has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Isn't that beautiful? Once you find reconciliation, that's when the water flows. That's when the blessings happen. Once we find reconciliation, that's when life begins. And so, um, what if our country what if it can never heal unless we find a way to bring together people, right? Um, what if those people in your life who you're struggling with the most, and things keep moving and falling apart in your life? What if it's as simple as make things right with your daughter, right? Make things right with the person you've offended. Make things right. That is so easy to say and the hardest thing in the world to do. But it is exactly what the ancients are talking about here. For the ancient Hebrew, their message was, you will not find peace. You won't find it unless you reconcile your odds with others. Until you can look at the Babylonian who has taken you captive and say, we are one. You will never find peace. Even if you leave Babylon, you'll still find yourself at odds until you can reconcile things. Only then will you find living water, which is essentially the message of Jesus over and over again to his people about the Romans. Until we can reconcile our differences with our enemies, we will never experience the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, it's so good. That was fun. So, how do we take this home? My question, I thought about this. How do we make amends? I've been thinking about this a lot lately this week. How do I make amends with those that I'm frustrated with or who have offended me? I've been thinking about this a lot. Number one, I think being humble is a great start. Be humble and don't assume. For Isaac, he made some assumptions in the beginning, but his humility kicked in. If we can go to those that we're frustrated with or have offended us, if we can go to them, or maybe we've offended them, we can go to them with humility and not make assumptions. That's a big step. That's one I'm learning. It's so difficult. Number two, accept responsibility for actions and what they have brought. So maybe I chose to do something. I was angry, I was sad, whatever the thing was, and it caused pain. Well, then in that moment, I'm going to take responsibility for those actions. I said that thing to you and I know it hurt. And you know what? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I did not intend for you to be hurt. And I do apologize for those actions. After you apologize, after you come in humility, take the moment to do what I just said. Admit that fault. You know what? I was at fault when I did that. I should not have attacked you the way I did. It was wrong. Admit the fault. And then here's the big one. I think that many of us, we forget. Change the behavior, demonstrate the change. It's one thing to say, yeah, sorry, never do that again, only to repeat the same thing, right? This won't happen again. And then things just don't shift. That's very frustrating. That's painful for many of us, right? When there's no change, no shift. So the beautiful thing here is now the challenge, now the ownership is on you, right? If you were the one at fault, you can say, now I'm going to show them that my behaviors will change. Things will shift. I'm going to demonstrate it daily. So good. And then lastly, make an effort to rebuild that trust. Make an effort to rebuild the relationship. Continue going there to Abimelech. Continue showing, look, I'm here with you. We are friends. We are one. Here's some water, right? Come back and feast again. Let's make this a yearly thing. So good. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. As always, please consider giving to ethos-church.org/donate. We are a tax-deductible group, and again, your donations help greatly. So please consider continuing to give to this thing that we do every week called Ethos, where we delve deeper and deeper into the Bible. And if you want to continue joining us online live with a community, consider joining Ethos living room groups and subscribe. hit that subscribe button. Let's build the channel. Let's get those views out there. We have low weeks, high weeks. It just kind of depends on what it is, but we'd love to see that continue to move up in that direction. We'd love to get more and more views on YouTube. As well as others that we see. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next week as we delve into chapter 27. So take care. We'll see you.